Welcome to the Enchanted Lightworker Podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern transformation. I'm Tracy Mohr, author of Path of the Luminous, board-certified hypnotherapist, clairvoyant, and teacher. Each week we explore the mind, the soul, and unseen forces that shape the life we're creating. Whether you're just beginning your spiritual journey or you've been walking this path for years, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. So whether you're listening while you're driving, walking along the beach, relaxing at home, or simply taking a few moments to yourself, I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're listening. Today's conversation is one that has been on my heart for a very long time. Today I want to talk about the moment everything changes. So, as a soul realignment practitioner, I've had the privilege of working with clients from all over. Every session is different because every person has lived a unique life, different countries, different cultures, different careers, different relationships, and beneath all of those differences, I've noticed something remarkable. Every single person who comes to me can point to one defining moment, the moment that divided their life into before and then after. So sometimes it was a moment of joy, sometimes it was a moment of heartbreak, sometimes it was so subtle they didn't even recognize it until actually years later. But every meaningful transformation begins with a moment, not years, not decades, just a single moment. We often imagine that our lives change gradually. That transformation is something that happens over months or years even. And while growth certainly unfolds over time, I've found that our direction often changes in an instant. One decision, one conversation, one realization, one courageous choice. So in my book that I wrote, The Path of the Luminous, a quote from this book is, "The past reveals the lesson. The present is where you choose freedom. The future is where your soul shines." So when I first wrote those words, I didn't fully appreciate how often they would become a foundation of the work that I do every day. Because nearly every client who comes to me arrives carrying the weight of yesterday, like a painful memory, a limiting belief, a relationship they can't let go of, a fear sometimes that has quietly shaped every decision they've made. Many people believe that healing means changing the past, but obviously we can't. The past has already become part of our story. And what we can change is the meaning we continue to give to it. That, that is where freedom actually begins. One of the biggest misconceptions about personal transformation is that it requires some dramatic spiritual experience. Some people imagine lightning bolts, visions, some extraordinary mystical event that they believe that is going to take place. And while those experiences certainly happen for some people, most transformation actually begins more quietly. It begins with a whisper, a feeling that something isn't right anymore. Maybe you've experienced that. On the outside, everything appears fine and normal with you. You have a job, you have responsibilities, and people assume you're happy, but yet something inside keeps asking you, is this really the life I meant to be living? So that question can be very uncomfortable, of course. And in fact, many people spend years trying not to hear it. We distract ourselves, we stay busy, we convince ourselves that someday we'll deal with it, but then as it goes, eventually that whisper becomes impossible to ignore. I know that moment actually personally, because years ago I found myself asking questions that I couldn't answer, questions about purpose, about why certain experiences kept repeating themselves to me, about why some fears seemed to have no logical explanation, and also about why I felt called towards spiritual work when it would have been much easier to continue living the life everyone expected me to live. Those questions eventually led me to study positive psychology, then hypnotherapy, past life regression, energy work, and learn the art of oracle cards and oracle reading. Initially, it was tarot. And then ultimately writing my book, The Path of the Luminous. But looking back now, I realized none of those experiences happened by accident. Each one was preparing me for the work that I do today and the person that I am today. It's interesting how life works that way. We often don't realize the dots while we're living through them. Only when we turn around do they begin to connect. Actually, Steve Jobs once said that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And I really believe this. I think it's such a profound wisdom in that statement. Because life isn't asking us to have every answer. It's asking us to just trust the next step. And as I often tell people that I work with, clarity rarely arrives before the moment. More often, clarity arrives because of the moment. We take one step, then another, and suddenly the path that once seemed invisible begins unfolding beneath our feet. One client shared something with me that I've never forgotten, actually. She said, "Tracy, I kept waiting until I felt fearless, but what changed in my life wasn't becoming fearless. It was deciding that my future mattered more than my fear." Oh, I love that. I think about that all the time. And think about that for a moment. How many opportunities have we postponed while waiting to feel quote unquote ready? How many dreams have we delayed because we believed confidence had to come first? What if confidence isn't the beginning of the journey? What if confidence is something that grows because we choose to take the journey? So I actually believe that is what is true. That confidence is something that comes into our existence because we choose to take the journey. So every meaningful transformation I've witnessed, both in my own life and in others that I've known, has become, it's begun with someone taking one simple decision, not to have all the answers, not to eliminate every fear, simply to take just the next step. And in that single step becomes the moment that everything changes. And that's what we're talking about today. So anyway, next I want to explore why we resist change. Why our subconscious holds on to old stories for so long. And how the teachings in my book that I wrote, The Path of the Luminous, can help us understand what it truly means to step into the light. So why is change so difficult? If every one of us wants greater peace, more joy, more purpose, and of course more abundance, why do we so often remain in situations that no longer serve our greater good. I've asked myself that question many, many times actually, and after working with clients from all over, I don't believe the answer is a lack of motivation. I think it's something a lot deeper. Human beings are very remarkable and good at adapting. We adapt to difficult relationships, we adapt to stressful jobs, we adapt to limiting beliefs, we even adapt to unhappiness, believe it or not. Actually, it's not hard to believe. A lot of people are out there, living in unhappy situations and just thinking that's all there is. Over time, what was once felt uncomfortable can begin to feel actually familiar. And because it feels familiar, our minds convince us that it's a safe place to be in. So one of the most profound realizations I've had through working with people is that fear really changes itself, rarely changes itself. That the fear of the unknown is what is comforting to us. The familiar may not make us happy, but at least we know what to expect. The unknown asks us to trust, and trust can feel vulnerable. So in the Path of the Luminous, I describe life as a journey back towards your own inner light. Not a light we have to earn, discover somewhere outside of ourselves even, or wait for someone else to give us. This light is already inside. It's already there. So I like to imagine the sun on a cloudy day. This is my analogy. The sun on a cloudy day, the clouds may hide the warmth of the sun for a while, but it never extinguishes it. The sun is still there. Our true nature is much the same. Fear, disappointment, grief, shame, and limiting beliefs can feel like a thick clouds covering our light, but the light itself has never disappeared. This understanding changed the way I began working with people. People often come to me believing something is wrong with them. They'll say things like, I've always been this way. I don't think I can change. I've struggled with this my entire life. Or even, I don't know why I keep repeating the same patterns. And I gently remind them that a pattern is not your identity. Just because you've repeated something for years doesn't make it, reflect who you truly are, authentically are. Sometimes it simply reacts to what you've practiced in your life. That distinction is, incredibly important because, if a pattern was learned, if we picked up a pattern along the way in our life, it can also be transformed and unlearned. That's one of the reasons I love the work of soul realignment is because people often ask me, what happens during a session? Every session is unique because every person is unique. But the heart of the work is helping people reconnect with the part of themselves that has always known the way forward. The truth is inside of you. Sometimes that means exploring subconscious beliefs that quietly shape, their decisions. So sometimes it also means uncovering emotional patterns that have been carried for years, even lifetimes. Sometimes it means recognizing the stories they've been telling themselves since childhood. And sometimes it also simply means giving someone permission to see themselves with compassion for the first time in a very, very long time. One client I remember very recently came to me convinced that she wasn't worthy of success. She had spent years working incredibly hard, always putting other people first, always believing that everyone else needs, mattered more than her own. On the surface, she was very confident, but underneath that confidence was a deeply rooted belief that she just simply wasn't enough. As we explored together where that belief had come from, something remarkable actually happened. She realized that she had spent decades trying to prove her worth instead of recognizing that her worth had never been what was in question. That insight didn't magically solve every challenge in her life, but it did change the lens through which she viewed herself. And when that lens changed, the choices began to change in her life. She started seeing, healthy relationships emerge. She started setting healthy boundaries. She stopped apologizing for everything under the sun and stopped apologizing for taking up space. She pursued other opportunities that had that she had talked herself out of for years. The external changes followed, her internal ones. Her life began to change immeasurably. And I've witnessed that pattern again and again. A person changes how they see themselves, and then the world suddenly begins to respond differently to them. I want to pause here for a moment because I think this is very important. When I talk about transformation, I'm not suggesting that life suddenly becomes perfect. After all, at the end of the day, we're all still human. We're still experiencing loss in our lives sometimes. We still face adversity. We still face uncertainty. We still have moments when, we're afraid and when we're alone. The difference is that fear no longer gets to decide who we become. One of my favorite ideas from one of my trainings is that every experience carries a lesson, but we are not meant to build our home inside that lesson. Think about it for a moment. How many people spend years living inside one painful chapter of their life? A divorce, a betrayal, a failure, a diagnosis of a disease, a rejection. Those experiences are real, yes. They deserve to be acknowledged. They are part of our blueprint and our life. But they were never, ever, 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 ever meant to become our permanent identity. They are simply chapters. They're not the whole book. The present moment gives us an opportunity to ask a different question. Not, why did this happen to me? But who am I becoming because of this? I love, if you follow me, if you have read my book or follow my teachings, you'll know that I follow Rebecca Campbell and have trained in her mystery school, and one of the things that she teaches that I simply love is that it's happening for me, not to me. And I just love that. It's such a simple phrase, but it's so true. Those questions that we ask ourselves, who am I becoming because of it? That question shifts our attention from helplessness to possibility. It invites us to become active participants in our own lives instead of believing that our past has already written our future. So, as a soul realignment practitioner, that may be one of the greatest privileges of my work, is helping people realize this. Watching someone, see that their story isn't over, watching hope return in their eyes, watching them recognize strengths that never knew they, had. Those are the moments I'll never take for granted, because every time I witness someone reconnect with their own inner light, I'm reminded why I wrote the book, The Path of the Luminous, in the first place. Not to tell people what to believe, but to remind them that, what has always been waiting inside of them is accessible to them in the now. The light is never left. Sometimes it simply needs to be uncovered. The clouds need to be removed, and the sun, so that the sun can shine again. And when this happens, it becomes another moment when, in the life of someone, when they can look back and say the moment that everything changed. So, as we continue today's conversation, I'd like to share a couple stories of people I've worked with over the years, some recent, some long ago. And they all kind of tie together. They all have a familiar theme. So first I want to talk about a physician who had forgotten how to live, basically. So not too long ago, I worked with someone who had spent decades caring for other people. And on paper, he had everything. He had a respectful career. He was financially stable. He had a beautiful wife and family. He was admired by his colleagues. Yet beneath everything, beneath all of those accomplishments, was literally exhaustion. Physical, mental, spiritual exhaustion. So I remember during one of our conversations, he said something I'll never forget. It was heartbreaking. He said, I've spent my whole life saving everyone else, but I don't remember the last time I truly felt alive and saved myself. I mean, wow. Haven't we all felt that way? Have you ever felt that way? I don't think that I've lived a life feeling that way constantly every day, but I think we've all experienced something like that, like where we save someone, we go out on a limb for someone and we do everything for them, and then we don't feel that they turn around and save us. It kind of, somewhere along the way, when those moments happen, we stop feeling connected to life. When those moments happen over and over, as him and I explored that feeling together, it became clear that success had slowly become tied to his worthiness. And then, in other words, if he wasn't achieving something or helping people, he actually felt he had no value. And if he rested, he felt guilty, come to find out. And if he said no to someone, he then suddenly felt like he was being selfish. But those moments had become so automatic to him that they weren't even questioned in his mind anymore. He just accepted them, that this is the life that he chose, that this is the life that his soul was to live. One of the beautiful things about soul realignment therapy is that it invites us to pause long enough to ask, is this belief actually true? Not, have I always believed it? Because sometimes we have always believed things that weren't true. It asks us to actually ask, is this belief true? Those are very, very different questions. Over time, this client began discovering outside, joyful activities that helped take him out of his focus on achieving. His relationships actually began to deepen once we discovered this, and started lifting this belief. His creativity actually returned. His life slowed down just enough for gratitude to become visible again. Gratitude is so key, and we talk about that all the time. It seems so simple and so basic, but it really is the key here. Also this person, his career didn't necessarily change. He still was very busy, and his career was still very demanding. But what changed was himself, his belief, his priorities, his belief that he's not just here to serve other people. He's not just here to put his needs aside and achieve other people's and strive for other people's happiness. Because he changed, everything else began changing too. That is the power of inner transformation. So, I want to talk about also a teacher that I worked with. She just lost hope, basically. It helps, her situation helps remind me that sometimes people don't actually need fixing, because she didn't need fixing. I don't believe that any of us really need fixing. We just sometimes need recalibration, refocusing. But this particular individual had spent years teaching and encouraging others, always giving, always supporting, always showing up. But actually privately, she was, so empty inside. She felt, and that's what her words were, is that she felt empty. She said to me, I remember, I don't know who I am anymore, she said. I know how to help everyone else. I just don't know how to help myself. And that was heartbreaking. That when she said that, I was like, oh my God. Those words really affected me. Because I think we all go through that. We want to be there for other people. We want to help other people. We know we can see other people, what other people need to do. And sometimes we can get frustrated by thinking, God, if they would just listen to what I have to say, it would help them immensely. But to help ourselves, that's a different story sometimes. I think because I think so many of us have experienced some version of that feeling, we become so busy fulfilling responsibilities sometimes in our life, filling our lives with our children, our work, even our family. We try to make our family happy. We live a life that supports their goals and their happiness. and meets their expectations, taking care of everyone around us, that eventually we actually forget to ask ourselves one simple question. What brings me to life? What lights me up? Notice I didn't say what makes me successful or what impresses other people that I can do. The question is, we need to ask ourselves, what makes me feel alive? What lights me up? What gets me excited? And it's not necessarily helping other people. Yeah, we can love helping other people, but at the end of the day, we end up feeling empty because most people, unfortunately, just take. And when they see someone that just gives, they will just take. And that's human nature, honestly. It's nothing bad that someone does. We're not attracting bad people into our lives. It's just the nature of human nature. So, what makes me feel alive as opposed to, what makes me successful? Those are very different questions now. Those are completely different questions because there's a lot of things that can make us successful but doesn't light us up or doesn't make us feel alive. It's simply, we can simply bury ourselves in years of obligation. So this teacher that I knew, as I continued to work with her, her old dreams began resurfacing, actually. Dreams that hadn't, been surfaced in years and that she had abandoned for decades earlier in her life because life became so busy and all the obligations in her life just mounted up on her. But eventually, through the work that we did together, her creative self, her creativity began to slowly return to her, and her curiosity returned. And it all starts with hope returning. Honestly, when we get up every day and we look at our lives and we dread having to go to work, we dread having to face the obligations, the responsibilities in our life, that's when we lose hope. We lose hope for ourselves. When we take the time, when we first get up in the morning, to journal, to think about gratitude, to meditate, life begins to change. Transformation begins to happen. She began transforming, and her transformation began to happen because she suddenly, not because she suddenly became a different person, but because she suddenly gave herself permission to become her true self again. And she returned to herself. I believe that's one of the greatest gifts that we can offer ourselves is permission to return to ourselves, permission to grow, permission to cultivate our life, cultivate our knowledge, cultivate our change, permission for us to become our authentic self. So another person that I worked with that I want to briefly talk about is they were an entrepreneur. They never felt secure with themselves. So I think one of the most common themes I encounter with people is our relationship with abundance. Not actually simply financial abundance, but the feeling of enoughness. You know, in this particular case, like so many conversations I've had with people about abundance, this client had built a successful business. From the outside, everything appeared very stable, but yet internally, there was constant anxiety, like real, like clinical anxiety. You know, what if it all disappears? What if I'm not good enough? What if people stop believing in me? You know, those questions created a cycle of fear that no amount of external success could help fix. So, you know, one afternoon I asked the question with this client. I said, what would change if you truly believed life was supporting you instead of testing you? So when I asked that question, he suddenly became silent. There was a long silence. And then he became kind of emotional. Not because there was an immediate answer or feeling, but just because that question had never been considered before. Sometimes transformation begins with, you know, just one question. You know, questions, when we pose questions to ourselves and to our soul, they have extraordinary power. They can open doors where certainty closes them. You know, with this particular client, as the weeks passed, something definitely began to shift with him. Not because fear disappeared completely, but because trust slowly became stronger than fear. Decisions became calmer. Relationships improved. Business opportunities appeared for him, you know, and they began to, show up out of nowhere. And just simply because he, you know, began responding differently to life. The anxiety of just letting go of that, you know, that fear of that, what if it all disappears, kind of just subsided. So again, you know, the outer world reflected the inner shift. So, you know, although these stories are different, I wanted to talk about each of them because, you know, they're definitely, I wonder if you can definitely hear a common thread in them. None of these people became someone new or someone different in the work that we did together. No one suddenly woke up with a different personality. No one received magical answers from me. Instead, each person changed the relationship with the external expectations of who the world tells us to be, and changed the relationship they had with themselves. You know, I want you to hear that they changed the relationship with the external expectations of who the world tells us to be. So when we shift that, it becomes powerful. When we go against that and say, I'm not following what the world tells me to be. I'm going to follow what my soul tells me to be. And that's where lasting transformation actually begins. You know, in The Path of the Luminous, my book, I write about the difference between living from fear and living from the light. And they're opposites, in case you didn't know. To me, light isn't perfection, though, so don't get me wrong. Light is awareness, you know, it's worthiness of ourselves, is knowing that we are worthy. And it's also willingness to see ourselves authentically with all of the flaws that we are, without judgment, without shame, without fear, and also without feeling we need to please others first before we please ourselves, or not only just please ourselves, but without being our authentic self and doing, serving our soul first. And I'm not talking about being selfish. I'm saying walking in our authenticity, rather than becoming what other people want us to be. So it's a very big difference in that. So, when we live with, when we are living in a belief that compromises our happiness, we can, we choose whether to decide to keep carrying it with us, or to become, to keep carrying, or to when we become aware of a destructive pattern in our lives, we actually can decide whether we should, whether it belongs to us, or whether we need to let it go. And that's the beauty of the fact that we can choose that. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates freedom, and freedom creates transformation. That's why I always want clients that I work with to always know that the goal isn't to become a different person. And it's not, we talked about being fixed. It's not about being fixed. It's about, the goal is to remove everything that has convinced you that you're someone you're not. So the goal is to remove everything that has convinced you that you're not your authentic self, that you're supposed to be this person, you're supposed to do this, you're obligated to be this way. To remove every limiting belief, every painful label anyone ever put on you, every story that whispers that you're not worthy, you're not pretty, you're not smart, you're not kind, you're not enough, or even the idea that others may put on you that says you'll never change, or you've missed your chance, your chance is over, those kind of horrible things that people program us through our lives to believe and to incorporate into our stories. But that's not who we authentically are. It's simply a story someone else wrote about us. That's not our story that we wrote. And the good news is that stories can be written. So I want you to write or rewrite your own story. And that's what my work is all about. So, and that's what soul realignment is all about. So today, if you're listening and wondering whether your life can change, I want you to know something. I have seen remarkable resilience in people from every walk of life. Over the years, whether through my work as a clairvoyant or my work as a past life regressionist, and especially the work I'm doing today with soul realignment, I've known healthcare professionals, teachers, as we talked about, artists, entrepreneurs, parents, retirees, and people that have all experienced transformation. profound transitions in their life. Their circumstances were all different. They came from all different walks of life. But transformation didn't begin when life became perfect. And I want you to hear that. Transformation does not begin when life becomes perfect. It began when these individuals became willing to see themselves through a different lens. When they became willing is the key word. Perhaps, that's the invitation, for today. Not to have every answer, not to force the next chapter, but simply to become curious about it, to just walk through it. Just step into that life. Step into it. Stop it being, stop it being frozen by fear. What belief, I want you to ask yourself, what belief am I carrying that no longer serves me? What story have I accepted as truth that deserves another look? That deserves some analysis, some analyzing, and what might become possible if allowed a little more light into my story. Sometimes those questions become the very moment that everything changes, quote unquote. So, as we begin to bring our conversation today to a close, I'd like to leave you with something that has become one of the guiding principles in my own life. Life doesn't change because we wish it would. Life changes because we become someone who is willing to see it differently. That may sound extremely simple, but don't mistake simple for easy, because it's not easy. Every meaningful transformation begins with awareness, not judgment, not criticism, but awareness. Give yourself a break. Don't criticize yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't allow others to judge you. Don't allow that's what we're talking about here, is others placing judgment on you. When they place that judgment on you, they're writing your story for you. They're telling you who you are. No, don't allow that to happen. Awareness shines a light into those places of our life where we've been afraid to look. In the Path of the Luminous, I write about light, not as something outside of ourselves, but as something that already exists within us. We all have light inside of us, but sometimes our external world, our external judgment, the external criticism, the external expectations, the external responsibilities that life puts on us, those are the dark clouds that cover that light. So to me, living as a luminous person doesn't mean pretending life is perfect. It doesn't mean smiling through the pain. It doesn't mean denying grief or disappointment. It means choosing again and again to bring awareness, compassion, and intention into every experience of our lives. And when I say intention can be misunderstood by putting a smile. I talk about putting a smile on your face in the morning and walking through your day with a smile. If you have to pretend, you have to pretend. And I only say that because Pretending is the seed that you're planting. It's not the existence that you're living. So that smile that you're forcing is the seed. It's not the authentic self. It's not covering anything up. It's not toxic positivity. When we talk about positive psychology, in my classes, the Art of Happiness classes, we talk about those are the seeds that we're planting. So in order to have a tree, you have to plant a seed. In order to have vegetables in your garden to nourish your soul, you have to plant those seeds first. And planting those seeds are putting the smile on, giggling, laughing, just setting the intention that we want those situations to be. I often think about walking along the shoreline just before sunrise, when I'm going through a dark time in my life. I always imagine myself on a beach walking during a sunrise, because I find that a beach there's nowhere more spiritual for me. If you go to my website, The Enchanted Lightworker, you'll see my love of beach imagery, and the ocean aesthetic. I just love it because you have water, which is emotion, sun, which is ambition and life, and the earth, the sand, which holds us, which stabilizes us, and then also the wind, which cleanses us, which brings us knowledge, which moves us along, The beach I find as, quiet serenity. The world, at first we can barely make out the horizon during a sunrise on the beach. When the world is mostly asleep, during that sunrise, we can barely make out the horizon as the sun is coming up. Everything feels uncertain. Then, almost without noticing, the first light begins to appear. The landscape hasn't changed at all. The ocean hasn't changed. The path beneath our feet hasn't changed. What has changed was the light beginning to shine. And because there is now light, you can finally see where you're going. I believe our lives work much the same way. Many people spend years searching for answers outside of themselves, looking for someone else to tell them who they are, is what we've been talking about. Waiting for that permission, that okay to be themselves, to be who they really are. Waiting for certainty, waiting until they feel comfortable, or waiting until they feel that everything is ready and lined up. But certainty is rarely the beginning. I want you to take that with you today, if anything, that certainty is rarely, it's almost never the beginning. Action is the beginning. Taking that step, putting one foot in front of the other, taking that step into the unknown, walking, jumping. Of course we have to do it with responsibility. Of course we can't just recklessly go through life, but it begins with one conversation, one decision, one act of courage. Those small moments, not dramatic, jumping off the cliff moments, but those small moments become the turning points in our life. You may never realize how important today's decision is until years from now. When we look back on our lives and we say, oh my God, if that hadn't happened to me, where would I be now? That had to happen to get me where I'm at. So you look back and say, that was the day I stopped settling. That was the day I chose peace over fear. I chose happiness over despair. That was the day I finally believed I was worth something. Oh my God, that breaks my heart to think that. That was the day that I finally realized, hey, I've got something to offer the world. And it's not just living into other people's whims. It's offering the world something valuable from my soul. In those moments, we can say, that was the day that everything changed. One of the questions I ask people I work with during our work together is this: if nothing changed in your life except the way you saw yourself, what would become possible? I invite you to listen or to ask yourself that question. Not just for a few seconds, but to really sit with it and really sit with that question. If nothing changed in your life except the way you saw yourself, what would become possible? What would happen? Imagine waking up tomorrow morning without the belief that you're not enough. Imagine, waking up tomorrow morning without the belief that you're too late in life, that it's too late for you to do this or accomplish that. What if you woke up without the belief that your past determines your future? What if you woke up and thought, how am I going to walk differently? How am I going to speak differently? What opportunities would you finally say yes to? Who would you become? Now here's the beautiful part. You don't have to wait until tomorrow. That journey begins right now. It begins in this moment. It begins with every waking moment. Not because everything around you has changed, quite the opposite. Simply because your willingness has changed. And willingness is incredibly powerful. Willingness is the key. Action is the catalyst, Before we finish today, I'd like to guide you through a brief reflection. If you're driving, simply listen. If you're somewhere quiet, perhaps close your eyes for just a moment. Take a slow, comfortable breath in. And slowly let it go. Again, breathing in. And breathing out. Allow your shoulders to soften. Notice your breathing without trying to change it. Just relax. Simply become present. I want you to close your eyes and just do some visualization with me. Imagine you're standing at the beginning of your beautiful life path. It's early morning, the air is fresh, and the sun is just beginning to rise on the horizon. Ahead, you see your path that represents the next chapter in your life. Behind you are the experiences that have shaped you. The lessons, but also the joys, along with the disappointments, but also the victories. along with the heartbreaks. And just know you don't need to erase any of them. They've actually helped make you who you are, and you're pretty darn amazing. Just notice that you're no longer carrying them on your back. They're no longer attached to you. They're way behind you, way behind. Feel honored that you learned from them. Feel honored that they're no longer weighing you down. Know now that, the path ahead, you don't need to see the entire journey. You don't need to see all the way into the distance. You don't need to see the future. You only need to see the next few steps. And that's enough. That's it. That's all there is. That's enough. I want you to ask yourself quietly now, what is one belief I'm ready to release? Just allow whatever comes to your mind to simply be there. No judgment, no forcing, no analyzing, just noticing. Now I want you to ask yourself, what quality am I ready to strengthen? Perhaps it's courage. Maybe it's trust. Maybe it's peace. We all could use some peace, right? And hopefully there's also joy, right? We all can live with more joy, self-compassion, and definitely purpose. Just allow whatever comes forward in your mind right now. Imagine it as a warm, radiant light surrounding you, engulfing your heart. With every breath, allow the light to grow a little brighter. Not because you're becoming someone new, but because you're remembering who you've always been. Take another slow breath in. Silently remind yourself, I can choose again. I can begin again. My past has taught me, but it does not define me. I am willing to take the next step into the next chapter of my life. Stay with that feeling for just a moment. Now bring yourself back to your awareness in the room around you and open your eyes. Take another comfortable breath. And I want you to carry that intention with you as you move through the day, as you move through the week. As we finish today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. People often ask me what I hope someone gains from reading my book, The Path of the Luminous, or from working with me in a soul realignment session, or even a past life regression session. My answer is always the same. I hope that they remember they are far more capable, resilient, creative, and wiser than they've been ever led to believe. I hope that they stop seeing themselves through the lens of old wounds and begin seeing themselves through the lens of possibility. That's the true magic. Seeing ourselves through the lens of possibility. Really stepping into the feeling that everything is possible for us. Because the greatest transformation isn't becoming someone else. It's finally allowing yourself to become who you've always been. The light that is always shining beneath those clouds. So if today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to continue the journey. You can learn more about the path of the luminous, explore my soul realignment sessions, past life regression therapy, or even my clairvoyant oracle readings, as well as other offerings by visiting my website, theenchantedlightworker.com. And I work with clients locally as well as all over the world through private online sessions. And it would be my honor to support you in your journey, wherever you're at in your journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. There are definitely more episodes like this coming. Leave a review and share it with someone who might need this message. Every review and every share helps these conversations reach someone who may be looking for hope, clarity, or just a new perspective on their life. Thank you for spending time with me. Until next time, remember, the past reveals the lesson, the present is where you choose freedom, and the future is where your soul shines. Take good care of yourself, and now go out and spread your light to the world.